My wife cheated on me with her ex. I humiliated her in front of her family and friends, and then I divorced her. Our marriage seemed like the epitome of stability and happiness to everyone around us. We had been together for nearly a decade, built a comfortable home, and were raising two wonderful children. Our friends often commented on how we appeared to be the perfect couple. I believed we had weathered the usual ups and downs of married life and come out stronger. Little did I know, there was a storm brewing beneath the surface that would turn my world upside down. Curiously, it all started with a seemingly innocuous detail that most would have overlooked: her sudden interest in rekindling old friendships on social media. She often reminisced about her past, particularly about one specific person, her ex. I didn't think much of it at first, attributing it to nostalgia. After all, we all have a past. But this particular connection would soon reveal a web of deceit that shattered my trust and our marriage. The first hint of trouble came one evening when I glanced at her phone and noticed a flurry of messages from an unfamiliar number. Normally, we were quite open with each other about our devices, but this time she seemed unusually guarded, quickly turning the screen away. My curiosity piqued. I decided to check the phone bill. There it was, an alarming frequency of texts and calls to the same number. I confronted her about it, but she dismissed my concerns, saying it was just an old friend she was catching up with. The explanation seemed plausible, yet something didn't sit right with me. The frequency and timing of their communication hinted at something more than just friendship. Unable to shake off my suspicions, I began to observe her more closely. Her behavior was changing. She was often distracted, emotionally distant, and made excuses to spend more time away from home. It wasn't long before I discovered the truth. She was having an affair with her ex. Armed with the evidence from the phone bill and her increasingly erratic behavior, I decided to confront her directly. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat her down in the living room. The house was eerily quiet, and the tension was palpable. I asked her point-blank about the nature of her relationship with her ex. At first, she denied everything, her face a mask of calm. But when I showed her the phone bill, her demeanor shifted. The color drained from her face, and she began to stammer, trying to piece together a flimsy excuse. She claimed they were just talking, that it was nothing serious. But I could see through her lies. Her eyes betrayed her guilt. Pressed further, she finally broke down and admitted to the affair. She tried to justify it, saying she felt neglected and unhappy, but all I could feel was a crushing sense of betrayal. Despite her admission, I needed more than just her words. I needed irrefutable proof of the affair. Over the next few weeks, I carefully gathered evidence. I started by checking her phone when she wasn't around, taking screenshots of incriminating messages. The conversations were explicit, leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. I also hired a private investigator to follow her. The investigator provided photographs and detailed reports of their meetings. They weren't just talking. They were meeting up at hotels and spending hours together. Each piece of evidence was like a dagger to the heart, but it steeled my resolve. I knew I had to confront her again, but this time, I planned to do it in a way that would make it impossible for her to deny or downplay her actions. The evidence I had gathered weighed heavily on me. Nights were sleepless, my mind constantly replaying the betrayal. I felt a deep sense of anger and sadness, emotions so intense that they often left me physically exhausted. I couldn't understand how the woman I had loved and trusted for so long could betray me in such a profound way. I confided in a few close friends and family members, seeking their support and advice. Their shock and sympathy provided some comfort, but it did little to alleviate the storm of emotions within me. I tried to stay strong for the sake of our children, putting on a brave face during the day, but the nights were the hardest. Alone with my thoughts, I would often break down, feeling the full weight of the betrayal. I knew I had to take action, but I wanted to ensure that when I did, it would leave no room for doubt or reconciliation. With the evidence in hand and my emotions somewhat under control, I began to plan the revelation. I decided that confronting her privately hadn't been enough. She needed to face the full consequences of her actions in front of those she cared about most. I decided to reveal her infidelity during a family gathering, ensuring that her humiliation would be witnessed by our closest friends and relatives. I chose a date carefully, a weekend when we were hosting a family dinner at our house. It was a setting where she would feel secure, surrounded by loved ones. I prepared a speech, going over the key points I wanted to make, and rehearsed it in my mind repeatedly. The night before the dinner, I barely slept, my mind racing with anticipation and a touch of guilt about the public nature of my plan. But I knew it was the only way to fully confront the betrayal and start the process of moving on. The day of the family dinner arrived, and the house was bustling with activity. Relatives and close friends filled the rooms, exchanging laughter and conversation. I moved through the crowd, maintaining a facade of normalcy, while inside, I was a bundle of nerves. My wife was in her element, playing the perfect hostess, oblivious to the storm about to hit. As dinner concluded and everyone gathered in the living room for dessert, I knew it was time. The room was filled with warmth and familiarity, which only intensified the gravity of what I was about to do. I stood up, clearing my throat to get everyone's attention. The room quieted down, and I could feel all eyes on me. My wife looked up, puzzled by the sudden change in mood. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and began to speak. "I have something important to share," I started, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I glanced around the room, seeing the curious faces of our friends and family. It's not easy for me to say this, but it's something everyone needs to know. I pulled out my phone, opening the folder containing the evidence. Turning to my wife, I said, "For the past few months, I've been aware of your affair with your ex." Gasps and whispers filled the room as I continued, detailing the late-night messages, the clandestine meetings, and the photographs from the investigator. My wife's face turned pale, and she looked around in desperation, but there was no escape. "You lied to me, to our family, and to our friends. You've betrayed all of us." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. My wife stood there, speechless, tears welling up in her eyes. Family members and friends, stunned by the revelation, started to voice their disbelief and disappointment. Her parents looked devastated, unable to comprehend their daughter's actions. Friends who had always admired our relationship now looked at her with a mix of pity and contempt. I watched as she tried to stammer out an explanation, but the evidence was undeniable. Her humiliation was complete, and for the first time, I saw the full impact of her betrayal on those around us. Despite the satisfaction of revealing the truth, I also felt a pang of sadness and loss. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the collapse of a life we had built together. After the revelation, the atmosphere in our home was unbearable. My wife, now fully aware of the gravity of her actions, tried to apologize and beg for forgiveness, but it was too late. The trust had been irrevocably shattered. We had several painful conversations in the days that followed, each one reinforcing my decision to end the marriage. Her remorse seemed genuine, but the betrayal was too deep for me to consider reconciliation. I explained to her that for the sake of our sanity and the well-being of our children, divorce was the only option. She cried and pleaded, but my resolve was firm. I knew that staying together would only prolong the pain and prevent both of us from moving on. It was time to start the painful but necessary process of separating our lives. The legal proceedings were as grueling as I had anticipated. We met with lawyers to discuss the division of assets, custody arrangements for the children, and the details of the divorce. Each meeting was a reminder of the life we were dismantling piece by piece. Despite the animosity, we both tried to keep things civil for the sake of our children, who were struggling to understand why their world was falling apart. There were moments of contention, especially regarding custody and financial matters, but ultimately, we reached an agreement. The day we signed the divorce papers was bittersweet. It marked the official end of our marriage and the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter for both of us. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow, knowing that we had both lost something irreplaceable. Adjusting to life after the divorce was challenging. I moved into a new apartment, a stark contrast to the family home I had left behind. The silence of the empty rooms was both a comfort and a reminder of my solitude. I focused on rebuilding my routine, pouring my energy into work and spending as much time as possible with my children. Their well-being became my top priority, and I worked hard to ensure they felt loved and secure despite the upheaval. Socially, I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, gradually expanding my support network. The emotional wounds were still fresh, but with each passing day, they began to heal. I started to rediscover who I was outside of the marriage, embracing new hobbies and opportunities that had been neglected for years. Though the pain of betrayal lingered, I found strength in the resilience of my children and the support of those around me.